All right, so we're about to start working on Unit 5 in class, and as you can see, I have some file folders up on the screen. I was about to set my Visual Studio Code to work off of my Unit 5 folder, and then as I look in the folder, I realized, hey, I don't have that folder, so I better create it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a replica of my Unit 4 folder. All the cookies are gone, right? Yeah, I know. People snagged it up quick. All right, so no free cookies tonight, but that's all right. I got a Kit Kat bar right here and some Cheetos. So, all right, so what I'm going to do is kind of like the standard thing I do every week. And since we're moving into Unit 5, I'm going to make a replica or a copy here of Unit 4. I'm going to paste it back into the same folder. And then I'm going to, I notice because I actually have like images in here now, it's taking a little while for it to copy. It's not like before where it was instantaneous. So a little more patience is involved. I'm also on a different computer this week, if you guys can't tell. Not one I'm as comfortable with as my home machine, but hey, it is what it is. Sometimes you got to go with what you have, right? And so this is where we're going to be working in that Unit 5 folder. So back over here in Visual Studio Code, what I did is I'm opening a new folder. You can also do that from the file menu, by the way. And then I'm going to find that same folder here in my Google Drive. And I put that in my Prometheus utility accounts. And then I have a fall 24, and there's Unit 5. So I'm just going to open that. And then I'm going to go ahead and actually, I'm going to go right into the project folder. You guys probably want to stay up one level. All right, so I have my files loaded up. I'm answering the security question there. I am also noticing that I'm way zoomed in, so I'm going to zoom out just a couple of clicks, and I hope that's still okay for you guys here in the classroom. You can see everything all right. I am going to go into the unit folder right now, and I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint because we are going to step through the contents in there. But I have to do this obligatory reminder here. I have not sent out a formal announcement. But there is the midterm exam coming. All right, so this is kind of, I don't necessarily want to record this into the video, but I'm doing it anyhow. The exams folder is becoming active right now. And I want you to notice that the midterm exam will become available at midnight, basically tonight. Doesn't mean you have to rush home and do it tonight. But the general lay of the land is that you have a 1 week time frame. You have basically between tonight up until end of day on the 17th. Midterm grades will post on the 17th. So you want to make sure that you try to get it done before that time and date if you want those points to count towards your midterm grade. I will send out an email about it tomorrow morning. But that's all I really want to say about it right now, but it is available starting at midnight. But our main goal tonight is to work through this unit here, which is Unit 5. Now, this is kind of an interesting title for the unit because we've been like learning our HTML, we've done a bunch of CSS, and we're going to keep ramping up both of those skills as we go. But we're starting to turn our focus now away from just like, hey, check out this tag and how it works, to like, hey, let's build a website and make it look good, right? So instead of having like really plain Jane looking kind of websites, we want to make something that achieves a purpose. This unit does cover 2 chapters. So this is why this unit stretches out a ways. So we have 2 chapters of content to go through and a bunch of assignments. I'm just going to do a little bit of a preview here so you can see what we have ahead of us. So we do have both of the PowerPoints are here. The videos for Unit 5, of course, are in that folder as per normal. New videos will get added there tomorrow, hopefully by noon. I do have some meetings in the morning. We'll see how fast I get it posted. The other thing that I think is important as well is that we have, I want you to notice this is kind of strange, but I have a chapter 6 case study, and your brain's probably going, where's the chapter 5, right? And so basically the way that this one works is you complete the chapter 5 one first, and then you work on chapter 6 and hand in chapter 6. but we're also on top of it starting to work on some other assignments. So one is a site design assignment. I will talk about this in detail as we kind of get to this material, but basically what will happen is you follow these instructions. So when I had you pick a project early on, or a few different projects, and I gave you a little feedback, everybody got a little feedback about their projects, because some people were like, I want to build an e-commerce site, or I want to build a blog, right? We don't have the back end tech to build that yet. So I might have suggested, well, we can build something that can simulate that, but it's not really going to be that, right? Like you can prepare a website to do it, but you can't really do it quite yet. So
suggestions, because I know I gave my but I can't that long.
I certainly can, right? I mean, without memorizing what you suggested, because I frankly, because I have like 24 students in here, right? And there, a bunch of them are online. I don't remember what everybody picked, right? But if I gave you a response like, hey, any of these are good, just pick one that you like and go with it. Or if you come up with a new idea, it's okay to have a new idea, right? Like maybe when you started, your idea was one thing. Juan, I'm assuming yours didn't change. Detroit Lions all the way, right? Right. And whatever it is, just having a topic to build around is really what it is. And it's practice, right? So don't put it on yourself that like, hey, I took this class to build my dad a website for his lawn care business or something like that. And you have all this pressure on you. That's not what you should do to yourself. But I do get students that do that, by the way. Right. They do that. All right. So, but that's okay, right? If you have a vision, like I want to build this website for myself to run a business someday, that's okay to try to do that, right? And get a head start on it. Because what I'll tell you is you're learning, and it's okay to learn with the stuff you're trying to do because you have a vision. You know what I mean? And the vision is important. And that's a lot what this unit is about, is that vision to create stuff. So I want you to notice that basically what that assignment entails is I want to know what you're going to do. So I want you to write me a paragraph about what it is you're going to do. Then you're going to create a site map, which is a very specific thing. I'll demonstrate how to do that. And then we'll also create a wireframe, which holds the basic layout of the website in rough form, not images and words and stuff like that or colors, but just like where stuff is going to go. And once you have, basically a blueprint, that's what a wireframe is, then it's a whole lot easier to build a website. And then if you have a theme on top of it that you really like, and you have a lot of resources available, well, there you go. That's what this assignment is about. So it's basically 3 components that I'm looking for: the description, a site map, and a wireframe. The other assignment, and I want you to notice, and I want you to look at the due dates on these too. So I don't want you to freak out to think it's all due next week. There is some stuff that's due next week, like the site design assignment and the case study, right? Those are due next week. But I just want to let you know that case study, I might push the date back by a day or 2 or 3. We'll see. But then there's this assignment that happens after midterm exams. So this is dated October 23rd. And I don't know if you guys are looking at your calendar. That's a couple of weeks from now, right? And so this is where you actually start taking your ideas and building the website. And there's no pressure to do it immediately because you're going to be learning new stuff as we go that you can add in, right? And I'm not looking for a completed site, but I do want you to notice, because this kind of mimics the final project in terms of how I list it. Man, there's a lot of words in there, right? But here's how it works, right? Whatever the website is that you're building, I have all these little bullet points that I'm looking for, right? And so we'll talk about this probably more next week, but if you can do all of these bullet points, you're going to earn all your points. And I'm not looking for beautiful perfection websites at this point. I just want to see that you can do these things. The perfection will come later, like in a couple of weeks, but hopefully, right? It's always what you guys will discover is whenever you're building something that like this, it always, it takes time and you're always revising. It's never perfect. There's another assignment in here too, and we'll start touching upon this, and this will be more of a next week thing also, and that is what we call a launch page. Some of this will involve, by the way, restructuring your files on Prometheus and maybe even on your own hard drive. So we kind of go back to this file management thing that is so critically important. It matters on your own computer. It matters on the web server. And then ultimately what I'm trying to do is to get you to the point where you have a landing page on Prometheus that will link to all the web work that you do here at Gateway, not just this class, right? That's kind of the grand goal. I had one of our students, and she's a fully online student, so we never see her in Zoom, right? But they're also attached to our class session. She's traveling in Brazil right now. And so Daniela, if you're listening to this, hi, welcome from the US. And we Zoomed the other day because she was like racing ahead and doing some of this stuff already and struggling with the file structure on Prometheus. And we ran into a lot of really interesting little challenges. And we weren't sure if it was maybe her internet service provider, because here she is in a foreign country, or if it was what she was doing on her Mac. She's a Mac person. But we did come up with a couple little things. So if anybody's a Mac person and has some issues, I think I discovered a couple of things that will help you. But this is also kind of a next week and beyond thing, but a really important one. It's not a lot of points on it, but really what we're ultimately doing with this launch page is we're kind of building you the beginnings of the portfolio. That's what's happening, right? And then as you take every other class here at Gateway and you're using the Prometheus server, you can add to your portfolio. And what I hope that you do, and ultimately, when I look at like what my Prometheus solutions page is, this thing, right? That's basically what this is. It's a page in the root of my account that links to all the stuff that's in that account. So every time I add a page, I add a link, right? And the beauty of that is, of course, every time I add work, if I keep that routine going, when I go, hey, remember in that one JavaScript class I took and we did that one thing? You can go back here and you can find it, right? Even if you delete all the files on your hard drive, it'll still be on Prometheus. And you have, granted, this is an ugly looking HTML page, but all the links work. It wouldn't take much to put CSS, graphics, animations, whatever you want to put on it to impress people, and you still have all the same links, right? So that's kind of like the grand goal. So as you move towards completing either your 1-year degree, your 2-year degree, or that certificate, or all three, right? Some people are signing up for all three. When you are done, you have the portfolio to carry with you. And it stays on Prometheus even after you graduate. When you are ready to promote yourself, you can show people, hey, look, this is all the work I did in school. They might not even look, but the fact that you even have it is enough. With
trying to use it like a press kit.
Yeah, well, Juan, that's exactly it, right? And this is the talk that Monica and I were having, is what sells a web developer is their portfolio, not their degree, right? So you can not have a degree, and if you have a portfolio and you show it to somebody, hey, this is what I've done, they'll hire you. I have friends, some people I work with pretty actively, that have zero training in this and do it professionally, freelance, right? That's how I got started too. I didn't have training in this. I figured it out, most of it the hard way, and I share with you guys all the tips to prevent you doing it the hard way, And man, I wish I had a portfolio like this, right? When I came out of school, I kind of did, but mine's on paper. And then I would write like a computer program, and the way I would like share the portfolios, I have a diskette in the portfolio, and they'd have to pull up the disk and put it in their computer and try the software, and then have all the code printed out like they even care, right? A web developer that has a link to real work, that impresses. Yeah.
I bought a domain and I'm working on it. Just right now, just trying to finalize. Because I have it done, I'm using React, and that's
Okay.
building it after that. But I just got finalized. I'm trying to get it done this week, but.
Yeah, don't put that kind of pressure on yourself, is what I'm gonna say. I know that you want to get it done.
Because I have a full-time job, so I have a lot of other responsibilities as a mature adult.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
that's my issue right now.
And I can relate because I have a bunch of projects that are kind of like that too.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on this website or this web page. And sometimes I have the time and sometimes you have to make the time.
Right.
Right.
I'm back to times like yours, so a lot of self-talk.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It is, and if you guys haven't figured this out yet, a lot of web skills are self-teachable. They really are. It's just a matter of the diligence. However, right? And so this is the however. If you study, and I always make the correlation to music, right? Because like the same thing in music, right? If you have like a demo in music that's really good, it opens doors, right? And a portfolio for a web person is the same way, and it has nothing to do with the number of degrees you have or anything like that. It's what's inside.
Right.
Right. So, and a lot of that is just diligence and effort, frankly. All right, let's pull the PowerPoints down and start digging into the material. And I know that's probably like the stuff we've talked about so far. And I know that people listening in on Zoom and probably to the video, we are in a classroom that is very echoey, right? And it sounds like we're in a cave or something, but I assure you we're in a classroom. And when you guys are talking in the background, it's often not picked up. So if it's really critical questions, you'll hear me repeat the questions so the people on Zoom can hear them and the people in the video. And I do not want to run it through the browser here, so I'm going to download that PowerPoint and run it from here. We are going to excuse me, right? I already want to go home, right? We're going to start with the chapter 5. All right, so let's kind of, let's dig in here. All ready to code, and I hope you guys are too. And here's our objectives for this chapter. So we're going to look, so this is kind of interesting because we're working on a chapter that talks about web design. So we're actually going to look at web designs and kind of analyze some aspects of them. We'll also talk about what kind of design works better than others, because not everything is universal, by the way. So often the kind of audience you have kind of dictates the kind of website you build. Really, and you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. We'll look at a couple different concepts as well, including responsive web design, keeping in mind that most people look at websites on their phones these days, not on computer screens, but all the designers work on computer screens and not phones, right? Because it's really hard to code on the phone, basically. Design, I know a lot of you did not sign up for design, but design is a natural aspect of web and an important one. And you'll notice that they're making, putting this slide up here. And I always remind, all my students, right? So the author of this book is a Wisconsin person, right? So yeah, Door County is the Wisconsin Door County. And, like Fish Creek is a place in Door County, for example, also. And I'm assuming Java Jam might be a coffee shop up in Door County, or maybe it's like the Java Cafe, or like who knows, right? But here is an example, basically, that how you design a website is really very relative to the kind of thing you're trying to promote. So for example, here we have a website that's highly graphical. There's a big background image, or it might even be a foreground image, I'm not even sure. It's a beautiful landscape. There's a couple of kayaks there. And they're trying to lure people to come to Door County. Your next adventure is only a paddle away. And what does she say? She says the compelling graphic draws you in. Maybe, maybe not, right? But for sure, one of the reasons somebody might want to go kayaking is to kind of commune with nature and get out on the water and see the blue sky, and so they want to be enveloped in it. So this is appropriate for this material, right? And so if I was building a kayak website and I'm trying to get people to come to Door County and kayak, man, a compelling image like this helps. Conversely, if I'm maybe doing a website that talks about the textbook resources for web design, because this is actually a dump of one of the authors, like website pages. It's very dry and pragmatic, right? Because I'm not trying to be lured in to go kayaking in this case. I just want the information. So just give me a list of the information with the links. It's very clean and business-like. Notice the background is blue. That's very typical of a business website also, and the typography is dark colors. The backgrounds are light. Any color that's used does not interfere with the content. It's just basically a listing of information. So here you got one audience that's, you're trying to get them to like escape, their work life and come out and go kayaking. So you give them a big graphic. And then here's the people that are trying to learn how to code and get their information. And that's really dry and pragmatic, right? You got to know your audience in terms of what you're delivering. Websites can be arranged in a number of different ways. All right. The most typical is what we call a hierarchy, right? Most websites will have a homepage, and then they'll have a certain number of key pages underneath them. And then some of those pages might have subpages underneath them. So for example, all right, here's a hierarchy, right? So I might have a website that's got a homepage, it's got an about page, it's got a contact page. I have a page for my products, but I got more than one product, and maybe I've got kayaks, and maybe I've got, I don't know, scooters or something, right? And I don't want to put those on the same page, but they're a logical subcategory of product, right? And I might even build my menus to match this. So I might have, on my menu home about contact products. And then when I hit products, it's got a drop down that's got like, kayaks and yeah, right. So, and those pages don't appear directly on the menu, but they appear on the submenu, right? And it makes sense. And if I went to the products page, I would hope there's a way to get to the category pages, right? But a hierarchy is probably one of the more common organization styles. Now, the one that we just looked at is, really simplistic, right? And the website that you guys will end up building for class probably will generally be pretty simplistic at this level. That's okay, right? The last thing you want is to have to build like 40 pages for your website. That's not how many I require. I think I require like 6 or 7 or something like that. Here's the same hierarchy, but in this case, it's a lot more wide and shallow, right? There's nothing that's going down beyond the second level. And not that it couldn't, but this is lots of things on the main menu and not a lot of things on submenus. And I think that's generally a good design, by the way. I'm not a huge fan of, like, if I'm looking for something on a website, that I have to click on something and then click on something else and click on something else. Oh, there it is, and click on something else, right? No, it's not. It really isn't, right? And people do not think about this. In some cases, that's okay, right? Like you're opting in for the complexity. For example, if I'm shopping on Amazon.com, I might go to the, I don't know, musical instrument page. And then I might click on guitars, and then I might click on pedals, and then I might click on whatever, echoes or something like that, right? And it might make sense to do that. But chances are people will shy away from complex navigation. And as soon as the navigation gets complex, they will opt for searching instead. Right? Think of the Google mentality, right? Very much the case. What is appropriate really depends on the website, real frankly, right? So notice that this author makes a couple of suggestions. Too many choices, they're confusing, and makes for a less usable website. Okay, I agree. I would say gather like information together into certain areas. So if I'm building a website about cars and motorcycles and scooters, I probably don't want to put scooters on the car page and cars on the motorcycle page, right? Be aware of the number of major navigation links. When you're on a big wide screen, by the way, you don't think about it. It's like, hey, I got 10 menu items. Great. Looks good. Right. Put it on the phone. It's like, wait, now it looks like hell. And what do they do on the phone when there's too many navigation items? They give you the hamburger menu, right? The 3 lines, right? Then you click that and it expands, right? And that's to kind of combat that issue. But it says try to group navigation links visually into groups with no more than about 4 links. And I generally agree with that. I don't agree with everything the author says, by the way. However, right, she does point out the 3-click rule, and this is exactly what I was talking about. If you get to a website that's organized like this, and a lot of websites are, so I'm here on the homepage, and then I want to get down here, so I click here, and then I click there, and then I click there, and then I click there, and then I finally get to the thing I want. It is too much. And I always tell people there's this kind of general rule in web that unfortunately, when people come to your website for the first time, they make a decision literally within a few seconds on if they're staying and looking or not. So if you can keep them there longer than 5 seconds, chances are they're going to click on something. If you can keep them there for 5 minutes, chances are they're going to buy something or at least consider it, right? But if your navigation is complex and they can't find what they're looking for quickly, they leave just as quickly as they came and they never come back. And it's one of the big challenges of web is to not do this. However, there are times where stuff like this is appropriate, but it has to be appropriately applied. Right? There are other organizations though. So hierarchy is the most common because that's what we're used to. But there's other ones too. And I think that this is a really nice example because sometimes you go to websites and there's no menu. You're just on a page, you read the content, and you want what's next, right? And they use an example of like maybe an educational thing here where it's like a lesson. So let's say like this is a website that does guitar lessons. They go to the first page, learn how to play the chord, you go to the second page, learn how to play part of the song, go to the third page, another part of the song, and it follows a sequence. It's kind of like a PowerPoint, right? One after the other, and it makes sense, right? So this can be used really effectively too. I think of it kind of like a PowerPoint, but it doesn't have to operate like one, right? Like I wouldn't do an e-commerce website like this. But if I had a website where I was showing somebody how to do something like a task, this would make a whole lot of sense. And then there's what I will, kind of say, we call this, web organization, right? And really it's a random organization of content on a website. And there's a lot of websites that operate this way. So the menu does not necessarily contain all the pages. And more often people are accessing the content through a search. I'll use Amazon as an example again, because I don't even know if they even have a hierarchy because it's so complex. But if I go on there and I'm looking for a product, I'm always searching. Or I'll search in Google and I'll end up on the thing I'm looking for. And then I just kind of go from there. And then hopefully they have like either reviews or recommendations or, hey, people who bought this also bought this. And then you start going down that rabbit hole. So random is kind of an interesting approach. I do like how they say not typically used for commercial sites. And then I'm using a commercial site like Amazon as the example because I really do truly feel that it is random, right? There's some order to it, but not really as much as you might think. And the reality is, folks, that it's database driven. It's driven by the data that they have, not by the pages they've created. All right. So there's some design principles, right? So like even if you don't consider yourself an artist and don't want to know anything about graphic design, there's some basic principles that you can learn in graphic design that apply really well to websites. And they're just as learnable as HTML or CSS, right? They're techniques that you follow. So one thing that is really common is people will take certain things and repeat them. Like, so for example, if I'm putting something like on this PowerPoint slide, there's a repetition here, right? It's a topic, a bullet, a topic, a bullet, a topic, a bullet. And for whatever that's worth, that can be compelling to people, at least from the standpoint of like, all right, well, I know every time I look at this site, this is how they do it. So we're repeating the pattern, right? Another thing is contrast. This is a really important one. How easy would this text be to read if my background was a dark gray? It'd be almost impossible. So why does black text on a white background, or almost black text, this is a trick a lot of web designers do too, they don't make it black, they make it like dark gray, and then the background isn't really white, it's off-white, you know? Why does that work? Because our eyes can see it more clearly. And I could demonstrate, I could change the background of the slide and you could see it for yourself. But when you started playing, remember we started doing backgrounds and we started like learning how to color the fonts. And of course you're like, hey, I'm gonna try hot pink with a red background, right? That hurts my eyes thinking about it. You know, I'm not even looking at it. But there's a reason why when you pick up like any printed material that's effective, and I have a little flyer here in my hand, right? So this is for our esports, and it won't even focus on Zoom. Isn't that terrible? But anyhow, there's yellow text here at the top, right? It kind of is focusing now. And a dark background, that works too. Because there's enough contrast between the letters. I know you guys have seen this, and it's really common, especially like on gaming websites. Like you have some guy, hey, I'll build a gaming fan page and I'll make the background black because black is great when I'm at night in my mom's basement playing a video game and it's dark in the room. That black background is wonderful, right? It doesn't hurt my eyes like that white screen. You know, I can bring up Google and it's like, right? But if I also put a dark font on it, it's not going to work. And there's color theories involved in that, but the greater the contrast, the better you can see the content. Do you want people to see the words or not? That's really the question. We do get website designers that sometimes make the words hard to read on purpose, so that you're like kind of maybe challenging your brain artistically or something. But yeah, well, you know what though? When you get older as well, and most of you guys aren't in that category, because I noticed it in myself. It's not that I have bad vision, but I see like my kids looking at their screens and they're really dim. And Juan, you had this experience here tonight, right? Like you logged in and like, I can't see this, right? And like, where's the brightness control? As you get older, that effect is more pronounced. And the greater the contrast, the brighter the screen, the easier it is to read. Do you want people spending money on your website or not? That's what you need to ask yourself. You want them to pull out that credit card, send you that money? You better make it readable and clear. You don't want them to struggle at all, right? All right, another design element is proximity. So for example, I'll use like the motorcycle scooter thing again, right? If I'm doing a website, and I'm talking about motorcycles, maybe all the motorcycles should be over here together, or maybe the images should be aligned of the motorcycles on the left and the scooters can be aligned on the right. But a proximity effect is helpful, right? Put like with like, it works visually from a design standpoint, big time. Also, alignment makes a big difference, and we'll look at some examples of this, but basically, we have this general way that we operate in the English-speaking world, and really most languages. How do we read stuff on the screen? Left to right. Are all languages left to right? No, right? So anybody who speaks Arabic or Hebrew or Chinese, yeah, that's a big one. They go the other direction. Talk about a mind bender, right? Because our eyes are trained, even looking at this PowerPoint, I start at the top left, go to the right, then I go down, over to the right, down, over to the right. Can you imagine if it was like from the right over to the left, from the right over to the left? Or if you guys are into like manga, right? You get like a Japanese comic book and it's printed backwards. So the back cover is the front cover because that's how they do it. Yeah. Talk about a mind bender. Yeah, it's really kind of weird. Then take Chinese into account. They go right to left, top to bottom. And actually they go right to left, but they go down first, go over a column, down. That's how they read. And that's what their character language is. Now, can you imagine when they have to learn how to code? They have to learn the same HTML that we do in English, which is totally opposite paradigm. And then they throw their Chinese characters in them and try to get them to behave. What a mind bender. Be very, very thankful that you're in the US and learning it with the language that it was created with. But alignment becomes really important. The author puts some very nice like examples in here. So here's actually kind of a complete looking website. You know, this is a nice looking homepage. If you guys could create something this beautiful for your final project, I'd be very proud of you, right? Because I think that looks pretty good. It is a little basic, but it's got some good design elements. Like, let's talk about what works about it. What are they promoting? Yeah. I mean, it's basically like the vacation lifestyle, right? Where do you want to go on vacation? Somewhere beautiful, right? And there's a beautiful picture. It's huge. It draws your attention. It is the focus. You're going to come to this bed and breakfast. You're going to look out your window, and this is what you're going to see, right? It could be very romantic or exciting or adventurous, whatever, right? What about the colors?
Well put together.
I think so, right? There's words over the image, which can sometimes be very, very bad. This is fairly readable. But if you ever do that effect, be mindful of the fact that if your letters start to conflict with your background, you want to do something about it, right? We experimented a little bit last week where we made like letters transparent and stuff. That can come back to bite you. So what a lot of designers will do sometimes is they'll put outlines around the letters. You can do that with CSS, by the way, or put a background behind the letters, or just use a different colored letter, whatever it takes to make it stand out. Notice the parts that have text in them, right? Where it says luxurious rooms and newsletter. And notice how narrow the text is, right? We've talked about this already. That's the trick that newspapers figured out hundreds of years ago, right? If you want people to be able to read this, don't make the words go like super wide across the screen, because people will go like this, they come back and they don't know where they're at, right? Tight and narrow. And then there's a repetition here. I don't know if you guys are picking up on it, but there's a column, a column, a column, right? The other repetition is the colors, the fonts, etc. There's also a very clear call to action. What's the call to action?
Look down.
Right up. Yeah. And so when you're selling something on the web, you want to have a way where people are going to click and put in that credit card, right? Like putting the hand out and asking for the money. But you're not going to make any money if you don't ask, right? Yeah, and they're asking twice, right? It's pretty clear what, and you know what? A call to action is really, really important. I'm going to give you guys an example of this. And I'll typically do this with Facebook, because Facebook has a really interesting login page. There's not really hardly anything on it. Like, and you notice I don't stay signed in, right? That's really smart with Facebook, by the way. But what's the call to action here? Log in. Right? We want you on the platform. Share stuff. Look at our ads, right? There's also another call, right? The other call is create a new account. Make it very, very apparent. What are you doing? You're logging in or you're creating an account. They have these little shortcut panels too. And really, there's more stuff here, but nobody ever clicks on it. But they have a whole bunch more stuff on their website, right?
You know, even more simple call to action.
No, you're right. Absolutely. Monica's saying Google has an even simpler call to action, don't they? Yeah. I mean, what are you doing on Google? I'm searching. Right. Well, I sometimes hit the wall. the waffle icon, right? And go do that. But I think that those are very interesting design choices because they are directing you on what to do. This website's either directing me to sign up for a room or sign up for the newsletter so we can keep bugging you to sign up for a room, right? Hey, and you know what? When you're out on the web, you're selling stuff usually. And if you're not trying to sell stuff, you're not going to sell stuff, period. Right. So we're always being salespeople when we do web. All right. Here's a little interesting quote from Tim Berners-Lee. You guys remember who that is? Might be really helpful for the midterm exam, by the way. All right. I'm going to do a quick little sideline on Tim Berners-Lee. So this is the guy who basically invented the concept of the World Wide Web. Not Al Gore, by the way, right? This is the guy. He came up with the concept that you don't have to know the IP address of the server, have to have an account on that server, what resource or what port number or network address or any of that goofy stuff, that you can just go to this screen and click on a link and go there. You don't have to memorize the address or anything like that. You just click and go. So you have a symbolic link that takes you to an internet resource. Those resources could all be on one machine or on a bunch of different machines. So he was the guy that wrote one of the original text-based web browsers that then became Mosaic and then became Netscape and et cetera. Right. So very important person. The interesting thing about him is you ever look him up and he does a lot of public speaking, right? So a lot of people don't know who he is, even so. But very important figure in the history of web. He's got a speech impediment. He stutters. It's really bizarre, but he's super intelligent, right? And if you can listen past the stutter, right? So you kind of, some people who have that problem have that problem. So he's really in tune to this concept of accessibility on the web. So he says the power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect. Right. So when we're building websites, we can't just build them for the gamer in their mom's basement working in the dark. Right. I'm sorry to pick on that, but that's a lot of the people that are on the internet, right? But we have to build it for everybody, the hard of seeing, the hard of hearing, the old, the young, right? It doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter what you're into, it should be for everybody, right? Now, kind of interesting, this whole concept of accessibility, when you do certain types of website work and you work for like a big corporation that deals with the public, or you deal with like a government entity, the website must be accessible, right? And they take extreme measures. Like, do you guys like log into Brightspace and notice like, oh, I can click on this little button here and I can listen to the web page. Like, who's that for? Yeah, for the deaf. Well, the blind, right? You're not the deaf. That would not be very good. But you got the right concept, the wrong direction there. But have you guys ever tried those tools?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know what? Sometimes I'm reading something. I was like, I got to turn my head away. I'm just going to hit listen and just whatever, right? So what ends up happening is kind of, here's another good example. If you're watching something on Netflix, do you ever watch with closed captioning?
I personally don't.
Yeah. I used to never do it, but every once in a while I'll watch some like weird British show and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And so then I got into this habit of turning it on all the time and I kind of dig it.
You like the subtitle?
Yeah, and not all the time, but it depends. I'll just put it like that. Right. But another aspect, and this is what really the slide is about, it's not just a person with disabilities. We have this assumption, right, that everybody has a high-speed connection. This is not true. Right? There are parts of the country where people don't have good bandwidth. We're very, very spoiled here. We got great bandwidth where we are. Go out into like the backwoods of Montana. If you have internet.
Even Sparta, Wisconsin.
I mean, right? Yeah. We go up north and we have the same problem. We do have internet to the cabin up
They
north.
just made, I don't know if you ever seen the Starlink, like routers almost.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. One of our instructors that was at the meeting tonight, Wendy, she's the blonde-haired one, right? She lives in Waterford, right, or just outside of Waterford. And she could not get good internet there, so she could never Zoom from home. She would try to tether off of her phone. Horrible, right? No, it's not. It's not far away from big population centers, but she could not get good internet. She would like call Spectrum, and I don't know if this is true. Maybe I'm thinking of somebody else, but they would call Spectrum to try to get a connection, and it'd be like, well, we got to pay $10,000 to run the poles and then bring the lines in. That's insane.
That's another thing, even, I know, like on the north side of Racine, Spectrum doesn't service over there. So
Right.
you gotta get AT&T internet.
Precisely. Sometimes you don't even have a choice. Yeah. And then many of those services also depend on how far you are away from your switching points, right? AT&T is notorious for that. Like if you're really close to a switch house or, one of their switch points in your neighborhood, you get great internet. You're at the far end of that. And I used to run a business in West Dallas, and we were at the end of the block of the last street of the switch house, which is 5 miles away. And I could never get more than 160K down back then. Yeah, it was crazy. And it cost a fortune also, right? But that was my only choice there. So people have slow internet. Sometimes they have, right, Monica, old outdated computer equipment, right? Because they can't afford anything better.
I know.
Right? So you want to build a website that takes forever to load and then combine it with a slow connection and a slow computer? Oh my God, right? So you want to make simple stuff that people can load quickly. And then we also have the mobile factor where people sometimes are on data plans that have limits.
Yeah.
And then if they hit the limit, then their speed throttles down and then their experience is horrible. Starlink is a really good workaround though. So what Wendy told me is she had to buy the equipment, which is like $500-600 or something. But now she has great internet speeds, and it's through satellite. The trick with Starlink is they're low in the atmosphere. Regular satellite internet is 24,000 miles up, so there's a latency, going up and back down. Starlink, I think, is 100 miles up, so it's not that far. And they have a whole bunch of access points, basically. There are rules for accessibility. If you really want to read up for them, you can go to the w3.org site, related to W3 schools, by the way, and they have a whole guideline for it. And if you ever did any government work, you have to study up on this stuff and make sure you match it, because government websites don't get funded unless they're fully accessible. They have to serve all citizens, right? You don't want to exclude anybody. All right, a couple more things we'll talk about here, and then we'll take a break, by the way. When you are designing for accessibility, they have what they call the POUR principles. So it needs to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? The last one in particular, I think, is kind of interesting because not only are you making it accessible to everybody, but you also want to kind of make it future-proof at the same time. These are really kind of weird concepts. Do you want to put a bunch of work into a website, and then when like a new tech comes around, or you want to add a feature, then it doesn't work and you got to redo the whole thing? It makes no sense, right? Not at all. All right. A couple of other things when you're putting words on the web. All right. Some of us get pretty verbose. I tend to be one of those people, by the way, right? As you can tell by my assignment descriptions and my announcements, I'm very word oriented, right? I get it. A lot of people don't like to read a lot of words.
Straight to the point.
I mean, well, that's the thing, right? So that's kind of what the bullet points are about, right? Like, what is it you're trying to say? I want to buy milk, I want to buy bread, sugar, and butter, or whatever, right? I don't need a paragraph on each one, right? If that's what I'm doing. All right. So what they do say, and this is the same principle for doing print publications, and if you ever study a newspaper or magazine, look at it really carefully. How many sentences are in that paragraph? Usually like 2 or 3, something like that. And then it's next paragraph. It's really effective writing style. So if you do write a lot of texts, it makes a whole lot of sense to break it down into separate paragraphs, because then people might actually read it. Why? Because they can read a little bit and take a mental break, read a little bit, take a mental break. And if you write well enough, they might be compelled to keep reading. But you know what most people do? They see words and they go, oh my God, words, next.
That's what I do.
That's pretty sad.
I hate a little speech text.
Yeah, I mean, that's an approach too. And you know what? I'll be real frank, I still like reading paper better than I like reading screens. I've kind of given up on that a little, but does anybody do like Kindle or anything like that, like with
So
books?
I bought digital books. I never had a digital book prior. I got still get used to it too, because I
Yeah.
usually like have a physical copy. I can go through.
Yeah, but those, right?
But it takes up a lot of space to have physical books versus.
Oh man, can you imagine if they come to campus with that book?
Yeah.
I used to do that. I used to load up like all my books, all my computers, all my cables and stuff. And my wife would grab my backpack and go, oh my God. It's like, no wonder you got a hunchback, you know? It's like, oh, okay, honey, thanks. All right, well, all right, headings and subheadings, those are important. We're going to learn why, but short paragraphs are very much the thing. There's also kind of this approach where, what fonts are you picking, right? There's fonts that we kind of consider normal and fonts that we don't. And you know what? If you put fonts up that are weird or cryptic and hard to read, you're losing people right there often. Okay, it's Halloween. A lot of people pull out like the Comic Sans and the creepy font and whatever. I get it. But that's for a specific purpose. If you're trying to just get information across, basic fonts, like the ones they have listed here, usually work very well. Use an appropriate size text in a recommending medium, which is 16 pixels. I'm gonna generally contest that a little bit. I think these days, especially when you move to a phone, you're better with an 18 pixel font or even a 20 pixel font as a medium. I think it's just easier to read, right?
I think I missed it, but what's the difference between
Okay, well okay. EM is simply a percentage. So 1M is the same as saying 100%.
1 M is, 1 EM is 100%.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and REM is a relative M, and it's relative to the screen proportions. So in other words, if I'm on a phone, it would look a different size than if I'm on a big screen. A lot of modern designers are using that. It's a whole field of study. I would consider that advanced CSS. That's more like a level 2 kind of thing. It's not that you can't explore it, but I do see a lot of designers using it, especially in responsive design. Yeah, that's where predominantly you see it. The other suggestion: strong contrast between text and the background. Absolutely, always you should do that. And then use columns instead of wide areas of horizontal text. And I think we talked about that enough, right? This will be the last slide we do before we take our break, by the way. And this is really kind of an interesting suggestion. Carefully choose text and hyperlinks. So when you make something a link, what words are you saying, click here? And do you think that works? What this author is telling you is that really doesn't work. Sometimes it works, right? What's better is if like, I want to read on the Detroit Lions, just give me a link on the Detroit Lions. I can figure out where to click, you know? And, yeah, right. It's blue, it's underlined, it's bold. Juan's got like things pointing to how awesome it is, right? Use hyperlink keywords or phrases, not entire sentences. Okay, sometimes I'm guilty of doing that, but hey, whatever. And then check your spelling. All right, here's one of the problems with web. When I'm working in Visual Studio Code, there's no spell check. So if you're dropping a bunch of copy in there, it's really simple to spell check. Just drop it into a word processor, and if it's underlining red, it's probably spelled wrong. Fix it, and then put it out on the web. The problem with the web is you put it out there, And if it's broken, people also judge you on that stuff, right? In some cases, it can be funny, like this is kind of funny. But if I'm like buying a product, like here's a better one. I'm like, I went to this doctor's website to get some medical advice, and they can't even spell a word correctly. I'm like, how much of a doctor are they? Right? That's what I'm thinking.
Also, so like I just finished doing the cybersecurity for training my year that I do it. So they tell you like part of the spam is that they have misspelled words and stuff like that. So if you see it, with me, I'm like, okay, well maybe it's a spam or some kind of phishing something as well. Because when they're doing the training, it trains you like when you look and you see misspelled words within emails, whatever.
It's a big one. A lot of like spam attacks, right? So the point that Monica was making is that she had some cybersecurity training where they were training her basically that one thing that we look for on websites and malicious emails and stuff are misspelled words to give you a tip that it's malicious, right? Because a lot of those originate from overseas and people don't know English as well as we do, right? A lot of people here don't know English that well either, but whatever, I'm not judging. Maybe a little, but it's a clear tip off, right? Like, it's like, for example, if somebody was like spoofing an email from our IT team, they might say like, hey, change your, password or whatever. And like, I know that person can spell.
Yeah.
Either they made a mistake or this isn't real.
Yeah.
Right. And then you should look really carefully. So misspellings are often the tip. All right, you guys, let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Right, and we'll come back and then we'll dig into some color theory. All right, next thing we're going to start to talk about is a little bit of color theory. And I know that we've kind of like rudimentarily talked about this when we started to learn about CSS and we learned about hex code and stuff like that. But that's kind of more like the technical aspect of how to add color to a web page. But colors are kind of an interesting area because they're a thing that you can actually study like you can study mathematics or science. All colors are based upon frequencies of light, and frequencies can be mathematically defined. And because of that, you can apply mathematical algorithms and stuff to them to come up with stuff that logically works together. It's really kind of strange, right? It's not an accident, for example, that I can take stuff on the color wheel, like if I took yellow and put it on top of indigo, I think this is, or whatever, that those colors work together contrasting. Why? Because they're on opposite ends of the color wheel. Now, if you guys ever studied this in even grade school or high school or college, if you do formally study art, they go really deep into this stuff. What we're seeing here is a color wheel that has how many colors on it? Let's see, there's 10, 12 colors, something like that. What are the 3 primary colors, though, when it comes to art? Do you guys know what those are?
Red, blue, and yellow.
Yes, correct, right? And so Monica correctly said red, blue, and yellow, right?
Make those colors, right?
Yeah, precisely. So like when I'm looking at yellow and blue, right? So yellow, blue, and red. If I want to make orange, I combine yellow and red and I get orange. And then if I take orange and mix it with yellow, then I get the one in between. I don't know what color that is. But the same goes with yellow and blue to get green, or blue and red to get purple. And so the colors that are adjacent to each other are the mix of color that you are on and the one next to the one that you're looking at, right? And so this is a blending. I want you guys to think about this though, because when we do colors on a computer screen, we don't do red, blue, yellow, we do red, green, blue, RGB. Why? Well, it has to do with how a computer screen works, right? So color theory, regular color theory applies to like the physical print world, right? When we work on a screen, screens work differently, so we go red, green, blue. Pretty weird. But the color theory still applies as to what looks good together. And when we talk red, yellow, and blue, those are what we call the primary colors. The secondary colors are the ones that are in between, like green, orange, and purple. And then the ones in between are called tertiary colors, right? Just in case you want to know. Right? They do have definitions. There's a bunch of really, really cool tools that are out on the web, and the author recommends a few of them, right? So we could look at this one if you want. It's been a while since I've looked at this one, so I don't know what it looks like these days, but this is one of the more famous ones because it's been around kind of like forever, by the way. So here's the Meyer color blending tool. This is really primitive looking HTML stuff, which is one of the reasons I kind of don't use it anymore. But what they're kind of trying to point out to you is if I choose the first color, let's say I choose this color, right? And then for the second color, I choose, I don't know, this color, I can do a blend and it tells me like supposedly what works. In this case, we're looking at midpoints, but I can change those values and reblend it, and then it gives me more options. So this is kind of an interesting tool.
So what it tells you is these are the colors that you should be working with for like combinations of that for your page.
Well, and not necessarily, right? But in other words, if you're coming in with two colors in mind, let's say like a football team's colors, very typical two colors, this will show you a palette of the blended colors.
So
Okay.
it uses as accent colors.
Maybe. I'm not necessarily saying that this is a good choice. So, and really, Monica, what I'm trying to steer us away from is I don't think this is a great tool for web.
Oh.
Okay. Now the author points it out because this website's been around kind of forever, and a lot of people do use it, and it is kind of a important website because of its history. But I do not think it's the best tool. In fact, what we're going to find is that the way colors work together is very, very mathematical, and randomly picking colors from the palette isn't really the way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to show you a different tool. And this one we used to call Cooler, which is Kuler, right? And I think I can still Google that and it'll come up. But really what it is the Adobe color tool. The URL for this, by the way, is color.adobe.com. And I'm a huge fan of this tool because I think it works really, really well. I've used it to do a lot of professional work. And what we're really kind of trying to work on here is this first little option. And so they put a color wheel up on the screen. And this is a more complicated color wheel. It has all the same colors as that other color wheel, but it has everything in between and also an intensity of color to lack of color. So like you go into the middle and there's no color, right? If you're on the outer edge of the wheel, it's as bright as the color, more saturated, right? Now, the way the color wheel works is you can go into these various modes. Okay, so there's analogous mode, monochromatic, try it out, and I'll click through a few of these, but the center wheel here with the little triangle on it, that's the primary one that we're looking at. So if I had a very particular color that I was going for, let's say I was looking for a certain shade of blue. Now you'll notice how all the other little circles kind of move in relation to this circle, and take a look at the colors that are generated now. These are what we call analogous colors. So they're kind of in the same color range. They're basically like blues and I guess lavender or something. But they do look nice together. Yeah, they sure do. Now, if I switch to monochromatic, all the colors are on the same axis in the color wheel. So really what we're getting is varying shades of the same color. Also kind of look good, right? So depending on what you're going for, if you do a triad, this is where it splits it on the color wheel. This is kind of weird, right? But if you pick a color that you like, let's say I like, I'm always kind of partial to the purples, you know? Let's say I pick this purple I really like. These other ones are the mathematical positions that form on the color wheel, right? If I could pick like a true red, for example, I would get yellow and blue and the opposite things. So whether or not this works, this is highly opinionated kind of stuff, right? Maybe it does, maybe it does not. But notice that they have a whole bunch of things. They have complementary colors. These actually look kind of nice together. Look how they sit on the color wheel. See how they're like polar opposites? So what you're discovering is when colors actually work well together, there's a mathematical reason for it. It's not by mistake. So designers that know this stuff and know tools like this, like I think these look kind of nice, you know, and not that I would necessarily pick these purples or these reds, but as you move around that color wheel, you know, and then often like when you're on the web, you don't want to use very strong colors. So you don't go to the edge of the wheel, you come in a little bit. And look how those colors soften up and actually become a little bit more pleasing to the eye, right? You guys ever walked into like Sherwin-Williams or Home Depot and shopped the paint department? And this is one of those things that drives me crazy because I'll go with my wife and she'll like take like 20 swatches and like, let's see what this one looks like. It's like, oh my God, you know, you know, it's like everyone else is painted white, you know, that kind of thing. You know, simple stuff. But the reality is a lot of the colors like that you put on a house tend to be really soft colors. Like you're moving in on the wheel and you're not using super bright ones because who wants like a bright pink house, for example? Maybe, I don't know. I'm not judging, I'm just saying, right? And then there's all these different modes, right? And you can experiment with these, and all of these have different values to them. The beauty of it is if you find stuff that you like, once you have it set here, you can actually save it. You can even download, this is a JPEG, and it tells you all the hex codes, right? Et cetera. You can go in there and tweak these. You can change the tints if you don't like the color that it is. So this is really a powerful, powerful tool. Compare this to the one that we were looking at before, which looked like, I don't know, 1995-ish, right? You know what I mean? That's why I say it's a cool website and everything that she's pointing out, but this is way more powerful.
And this is called Adobe Color.
Yeah, it's color.adobe.com. It used to run under the name of Cooler, Kuler. So if you Google that, it brings you here. Right, so this is really the Cooler tool. And then when you do come up with a palette, right, and you got the colors you like because you worked on it for hours, and this is one of those super geeky things again. And I've done this, you know, where I'm building a website, and I'm like, what colors am I using? I'll spend hours in here going, I don't know. Yeah, okay, right. But then you can save it, and if you are a member of the Adobe Cloud like I am, I can sign in. And yeah, this is public facing, but if you have an Adobe account, use their tools, you can save the color palettes in the library, which is kind of cool. But if you can come here, you just write down all the hex codes, you're good. Not a big deal. Right. So very, very neat tool. It takes kind of like the color picker concept and ramps it up to like a, you know, next level and then some, basically. They show some examples of what we were talking about, like monochromatic, analogous, complementary colors. And these are things that you know, we were just looking at. The split complementary and whatever however you say those words, which I really don't care to repeat, right? People do spend a lot of time picking colors for branding and products, right? And I would challenge you to do this next time you guys go out shopping, right? And you're just like, for example, you're pulling up to Walmart, right? Every shop's at Walmart, pretty much, right? What color is their sign?
Colors your sign.
Yeah, what colors? What are their colors? Blue and yellow. All right. If I go to that color wheel and I find like, and I'm just going to go to, let's do complementary. And then I'll try to find the right Walmart blue. And we're looking at the center box at the bottom. I don't know, something like that, right? Maybe like this. I don't know. What's the complementary color?
Yeah.
Yeah. But the colors that companies pick, there's a psychology that also goes with it. When you walk into a restaurant, restaurants will often use certain colors inside the building because they know those colors make you hungry.
So you put your main point at yellow, stay forward, let's see.
Yeah. And you know what? There's a true yellow. It's kind of a purpley blue. Yeah, but it's kind of that's kind of Walmart right there, I think. The blue and the yellow. It's not accidental. Yeah, that's kind of my point. Not accidental at all. Or how about like a company like Applebee's? What are their colors?
Red.
Yeah. Yeah, now you're going to look it up, right? There is a whole thing though, right? So a lot of designers will tell you don't want to choose too many colors for a color scheme. You usually want to pick one that's the most important color. For example, if you go to Target, what's their color? Red, right? Yeah. Kind of interesting, right? And I'm trying to think like, okay, Educators Credit Union, what's their color? Burgundy, maybe? Yeah, yeah. And you can go on and on. But if you like, especially if you walk down the halls of a shopping mall or you drive down like Highway 20 or something like a busy street that's got a lot of stores, take a look at their signs sometime, especially for really big companies where they pay really big money to people to figure out the right exact color to make that sign. And then how those signs look during the daytime and how they look at night, because that's also really telling because it's a total thing. People pay big money to get the right colors for their branding.
Like McDonald's, they have red and yellow.
Yeah. Does that make you hungry?
I'm like McDonald's.
Well, I try not to eat there too much, but I do have the guilty pleasure of once in a while I want their fries or a Big Mac or something.
But it is attractive though, especially to kids. So that's that.
Yeah, red and yellow kind of. I'm not sure what they're shooting for there. And then you look at like Burger King and what's their colors, or Taco Bell. Yeah, I mean, this is really kind of interesting stuff. But what you're doing is you're proving my point. It's sticking in your mind that you're attaching the identity of a business or a product to a color. Like I'm holding up my little Kit Kat bar here, right? What color are my Cheetos? We'll just get my fingers, I guess, right? But these are really important things. So they give you a lot of really good things here, and it's really kind of important that when you are using color on a website that you think about what you're using. Don't haphazardly pick colors and hex codes. Come up with a theme where you might have a pool of 4, 5, 6 colors that look good together, and then use those colors. Make one color dominant. That's what they do in advertising. There are a bunch of other tools, right? So like if you're worried about contrast, you can go to any one of these websites and they will analyze the contrast of your content, by the way. I'm not going to go there if you don't mind. Here's some other color resources. We looked at the color blend tool. We looked at the Adobe color thing. That's the one that we were looking at, but they're not the only one, right? So there's other services. I'll let you explore those on your own. When you're determining colors for a website, audience matters. This website example is targeted for kids. So I got like yellows, purples, blues, aqua. Oh my God, right? Yeah, right. What does it say? Snurpy games?
It's not for reading.
Yeah, it's not for reading, right? I always have that comment, like I look at like some heavy metal bands and they have these logos, like, what does that say? You're not trying to sell yourself very well, are you? Can't even read it. So yeah, I would agree. But what if, they had a different audience? So the point on this one is this appeals to young adults. So this is the demographic I was talking about, the teenager in their mom's basement playing video games in the dark, right? Dark background, light text. No offense to anybody who lives in that scenario, by the way, but it is kind of a thing, right? Those people are much more apt to like a dark mode screen because of when they're using the computer, right? And what they're doing on it. All right, so always consider your audience. What about this one, right? Okay, this one says appealing to everybody, but highly graphic, right? You can read the words, but really the focus is this thing that you're trying to promote, which is photography. Another example, all right, appealing to older adults, right? Senior moments, and I guess now I'm in that category, but dark text, light background, there's some color, it doesn't really get too much in the way. The information is really clear to see, the fonts are a little bit bigger, things are organized and clear, right? And then I notice they have like 55 is the new 30. But obviously written by an older person, right? You guys will get there someday too, so don't poke fun. I think this is, I don't usually hit these checkpoints when I do this, but I think it's really kind of interesting that this author points us to Walmart, right? And wants us to look at their design and comment on it. And I think it's pretty fascinating. Yeah, the yellow and the blue is not by mistake, by the way. Use of graphics on a website, and the grand point here is that the file size and the dimension matter. So in other words, when you're putting any images on a web page, full resolution often is not appropriate. You want to downscale your images so they fit well on the screen and you're not wasting memory, but they're still clear and sharp. I'm not really a huge fan of using graphics for navigation. I used to do it a lot, and then I discovered kind of the hard way from a couple of clients where I like built these really super graphical navigation structures, and then I would show them to the client, and I was all proud of it. Like, hey, check it out, and they'd be like, I hate it. Man, was that an eye-opening, thing for me? Because I thought it looked great, but the person I was building for absolutely didn't like it. So be really careful about what graphics that you use. They talk about this concept of aliased and anti-aliased text. I don't usually worry about this too much anymore, but what happens sometimes is when you're putting text on the screen, and what we have to realize is that all the stuff that appears on the screen is bitmapped. It's little tiny squares on the screen. So if I take something that's on an angle like the edge of this letter A, and I could zoom in on it infinitely, I'd get to the point where I would see little squares like jagged, and you could see that. Aliasing basically helps to minimize that effect by kind of blurring that line, especially when you zoom in. Unfortunately, screens are built with pixels, so whenever you're doing an angled line, you're not really getting a true line. Kind of weird, right? But true. Always put alt text on your images. And then they also recommend here that you don't use multimedia too much, right? It depends on your page. Careful with large graphics, use the alt attribute. They just said that. Be sure your message gets across even if images are not displayed. So the alt text, right? If your image doesn't load, the text from the alt text will load. So you should say something in there that's important, like picture of a dog, if it's a picture of a dog, or picture of President Joe Biden, whatever. Tell us what it is, just in case it doesn't show up. Here's an example of that aliased and anti-alias thing, and I don't know if you can kind of make that out, but on this graphic here, you can see those jagged edges, and they did it on purpose, right, to make it look more extreme. But often when you're resizing graphics, and you're taking something low res and making it big, it gets pixelated and it looks horrible. Right? So be really mindful of that. When it's anti-aliased, it looks nice and smooth. Now, if I truly zoomed in on that, you would still see the jagged lines, but you notice how they're kind of a little more blurred. So what anti-aliasing basically does is it gives the illusion of smoothness when it's not really there. Mostly we don't worry about that these days in the web, but in the old days it was a really huge consideration because not all fonts would scale well. But you can see that effect, especially when you're using, I'm just going to say low quality images slightly. They also make this other recommendation. You know, the web is a visual medium, but they're making this recommendation is don't just throw images on the page just because. Use only the ones you truly need, right? So use less images and use quality images rather than a whole bunch of bad ones, right? I'm a huge believer of that. And a really good example is like, like if you take pictures, whether it's on your phone or a camera or whatever, you go to an event, and you take 100 pictures, and 50 pictures are of you. You go through all those pictures and there's only one good one. You know what I mean? And that's probably lucky that you only have one good one. There's not many pictures that really turn out well. And one reason you do hire a professional photographer to take photographs, by the way, is people that are good at taking photographs can get a much higher percentage of good shots than people that don't know how to shoot them. Right. And it's kind of a little bit of a skill. Another thing that they recommend, I'm not necessarily a huge believer of this, is to reuse your images, right? So I don't need like 20 different pictures of my dog Sparky. Maybe that one picture will suffice, and I can use that on every page. I'm not sure I agree with that, but that's what the author is purporting. Here's a thing that maybe you haven't thought of, right? And I learned this one the hard way, especially in the old days when browsers were not consistent at displaying the content. That whenever you develop a web page, don't be looking at it with one web browser. If you use Chrome, open up Firefox. If you use Firefox, open up Edge. If you got a Mac, load it up on Safari. If you also have Brave available and Opera, load it up on that. And if you have a PC and a Mac, load it up on all the browsers and all the operating systems that you have. And look at it on your phone and try different browsers. Because here's what happens. Even today, they look different sometimes. It's not as bad as it used to be. Very literally, 15, 20 years ago, we would build stuff. It would look great. I'd go to a different browser. Oh my God, it's horrible. What happened?
What caused that?
Inconsistency in how the browsers render the HTML code. What happened in the past is, and Microsoft was the most notorious for this with Internet Explorer, they followed the rules how they saw fit. So if you designed for their browser, it looked great. And then you throw it in a different browser and it would look horrible. Or vice versa, you design for like a generic browser and then you go to Microsoft and it would look horrible. So often we would actually write different CSS for Microsoft browsers and different CSS for non-Microsoft browsers. Can you imagine the nightmare that was? You're doing double the work, but you had to because you couldn't predict what people were looking at it with. What's happened is, this is pre-HTML5, by the way. When HTML5 came out, the standards were much more enforced and it was backwards compatible. So that was a really big issue. And Google Chrome was probably one of the first ones to latch on to HTML5. Firefox to this day is the one that does it the most accurately, right? So most true web professionals use Firefox as a reference, not Chrome. Sorry, Chrome people, right? However, right, both of those browser bases are very accurate now. So there's very, very little nuance differences like there used to be. So I don't worry about it as much when I'm designing stuff, but I still, if I'm building something, I'll load it up on a different browser and I'll load it up on my Mac just to make sure. And then I'll try it on my phone. And then if you have an iPhone, I'll have you load it up on your phone. Then I'll load it up on my iPad. I'll throw it up on my TV set, whatever it takes to see what it looks like to make sure it looks good in every scenario. Because if it's not, once again, you're losing people, you're losing money, you're not making customers happy. People don't want to hire you again, right? Another thing that we don't think about is, like right now, I'm on a full HD screen, 1920 pixels across, 1080 pixels tall. My MacBook doesn't do that. I can make it do it, but that's not the native resolution. My iPad is different. My phone is different. And there's also the issue of like computer screens are horizontal, phones are vertical typically. You got to accommodate for all of that stuff. How do you know? You test, 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 test. At the level that we're at right now, we're more concerned with just getting it up there and having it work. Going, good enough for Ty's class, you know? But when it comes to doing professional work, man, it's got to be on point in every scenario, especially if you're serious about it, right? So there are techniques that you can actually employ, and they're making a couple suggestions here. Centered page content. In the old days when I started doing this stuff, all our web pages were left justified, right? So if the screen was really wide, like wider than you anticipated, all your stuff was on the left, right? These days, we tend to center it because no matter how wide you make your screen, it still looks pretty good, right? And then if you go on your phone, then you get rid of all the sidebar stuff and you just get the content on the narrow part of the phone. So they typically suggest that you either set a fixed width for things based on the device and the format, or you run things in percentages so that it automatically adjusts. But there's an art and a science to it combo, and it takes a little bit of practice, right? Here they're kind of showing the example of like taking that photography page and centering the content on the page. Even though we're not using the sidebars, right? It is at least balanced on the page and still looks okay, right? How you put your navigation together is really important too. All right, so let's see what the thing says. It says provide clear navigation. Notice a good little whack of space there. In the same location on each page. Okay, that makes sense. Right? I go to a website, the navigation's across the top. I don't want to go to the next page and then all of a sudden it's on the side. You see what I'm saying? Or it shifted or it moved or this menu looks different than the previous menu. It makes no sense. Whatever your menu is, keep it consistent. The most common is across the top or down the left side. Left side used to be the old standard, by the way. And then they moved to top navigation, which I think makes more sense.
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
Right.
When is the best time, like, you know, to have the sidebar versus navigation on top? When is the best scenario to use the sidebar?
Okay, so Monica's question is, when is it the best time to use a sidebar for navigation versus the top? You know what? For me, top navigation typically works better because I think most people expect to see it there. But when you go to a complex website, and I think of like Amazon.com as a great example again, they have both. They do. Why? Because they have so much darn content. That's why. When you guys build your websites for this class, you'll struggle to, like, I only got 3 links. Okay, oh my God, I got 6 links. I'll just put them on the top. You don't have enough to really do a sidebar. But it doesn't mean that the top link approach is the correct one. Sometimes it really is an aesthetic choice. So maybe you have a cool looking header or logo and you don't want to put your nav up there, right? We also have that hamburger menu approach. So when your navigation collapses to mobile and you get the 3 lines and you click it and it expands, some people do that on big websites now too. Right. And because people know that icon, they just go right for it and it's not a big deal. Right. So I can see both approaches working. They do talk about, for example, like drop-down menus like this, right? That's a thing. So if you have a lot of menu items and you don't want to put too much on the main nav, you can do the drop-downs. There's a bunch of different ways to do these. So that's kind of notable to talk about. One approach is to use JavaScript. That's kind of the old-fashioned way to do it. The more modern way is to use CSS to do it. So in other words, You don't see this stuff until you hover and then it pops up and then you can react to it. Both are fairly challenging to code and take a little bit of practice, real frankly. There's a lot of really good examples on the web. The book's got a couple of examples too. Generally speaking, most of the websites that you see that use that are built on top of content management systems that have automatic menu systems. You just tell it what the main items are and the submenu items, and it just does it. And so that's how most of them are. When you're hand coding it, man, I remember some of my first experiences doing it, man, it was just a nightmare. It was like, all right, this effect, how do you do it? Damn it, and you would just spend hours and hours and hours and hours. And there's all these like crazy little nuances to it, right? I'm not saying it's that difficult to do. It is easier these days because there's better examples, honestly. All right, so here's the other part of that like site design thing, which is the wireframe thing. And a lot of designers will talk about designing a website, but when you sit down with a client, and I'm teaching a capstone group right now. So you guys are in the first class of the web program right now, and I'm teaching a class of people that are in the last class, right? And we have a one project going on right now. We're building a website for a food bank in Pennsylvania. It's one of our students that's from Pennsylvania, and they don't have a website at all. They don't have anybody that like knows what a website should look like. They just know they need a website, right? All they can give us is their name, address, some basic information, their phone number, their email address, and their logo. And we got to build everything else. They're not coming in saying, this is what I want it to look like. So how do you build a website like that? It goes back to my analogy. When you want to build a house, you don't run over to Menards, buy the 2x4 nails and hammer and get busy. You start with a blueprint, right? For those of you in my Python class, right, you hear the same spiel there, right? If I'm trying to write some code, I don't just start coding. I first pseudocode it and I sketch out the problem. I might flowchart it. I do some calculations. I figure out what it's going to kind of look like before I build it. Websites are even more important that way. A wireframe is basically a super rough representation of how to build a web page. So here's an example. Now, these aren't the actual images going on the website. The words that say header or heading or subheading aren't the actual subheadings, right? They're very rough representations of what the person wants to build. So this is kind of a challenge because you could do this with pencil and paper. And you know what? That's still my favorite tool. If I'm sitting down with a client trying to figure out what a website should look like, I'll just draw something quick on a napkin or whatever and go, all right, well, do you want the menu over here? Or do you think we should put the logo here? Or what do you think about this idea? Or what do you think about that idea? And you come up with a rough design. And then if we're in agreement, with your client and what you're going to do, well, then you can start building because now I have at least a representation. I have a couple of examples, and I don't know that I have them on this machine, but I can show them to you next week if I don't have them on this machine, where I used to do a bunch of freelance work maybe a decade or so ago when I was teaching at the Art Institute in Milwaukee. And one of the other web teachers, who's also a professional graphic artist, had this great propensity to drum up projects. So like he would like find a business that needed a website. He would make their logo, come up with their color scheme, and then he would make a graphic of exactly what their website would look like. And he did beautiful work. It was like on point professional kind of stuff. And he would hand me the graphic after he got the contract. He's like, all right, Ty, build this in WordPress or build this as a static page or whatever. And I would sit there and I would create it with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to the point where it was pixel perfect, exact same images, colors, fonts, the whole bit. And then we had this website that looked exactly like his design. And man, we had really happy clients, right? The stuff looked beautiful. It was out on the web. And I'm thinking, I do have one example that I can show you that's probably still on one of my sites. I'm hoping. Crossing fingers here. There we go. All right. This is not a site that ever got fully built, by the way. This is a example of what the website would have looked like if we would have built it out. But when the guy handed me his files, he did all the work in Illustrator, which is a vector graphics program. Because it's vector graphics, I could dig into the file. I could look at the hex codes of the colors, the fonts, the font size, the font color, had the graphics embedded, so I could extract all the assets from it. And then all I did is I built this basically off of that image. It's just very basic HTML. And I just want you guys to see it's nothing really fancy here, right? All the stuff that's on the page, all the links, all the words, whatever. And then all the CSS that goes with it, right? It's not even that much CSS that allowed us to take the concept and do like kind of some weird stuff. Like, for example, like here's a box that's floating over two other boxes. That's kind of a neat effect, right? He had it drawn this way and there was a drop shadow, and I'm like, how am I going to do that, right? I figured it out. It's really not that hard to do, actually. But man, does it look good, right? And a lot of the images and words on here are not real images or words. This never came to fruition, so the guy never pulled the trigger on the contract. I don't know if he didn't like it, or he didn't like do his book, or he didn't get his book deal or whatever. It was kind of a political site, which I wasn't too thrilled with. But if he was to build out the whole thing, all the links that you see at the bottom here would have all been pages on the site. And it was e-commerce enabled, right? So it would have been a big project. It would have been like a $5,000-$10,000 project even back then. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we would do. So he would drop a design and it would look exactly like this. He'd hand me the files. I'd turn it into HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And if the client liked it, we would probably build this in WordPress. And it would be a real website with a functioning back end and e-commerce, making money. You know, it's kind of the thing. And there's no shortage of work to do this kind of stuff. And the other thing that I want you guys to think about this as you move into this career is a lot of people think, oh, like, I'm going to go study web and I'm going to go get this job, right? Web also allows you to freelance.
Yeah. That's right.
You know, and freelance is a wonderful thing because I can do, and I did a whole bunch of work, you know, where I did websites like this, and, you know, we would get a contract, we'd quote it out for a couple of months down the road, and then I would knock it out in a couple of days, you know, because I wanted the money, you know. Clients super happy. It's like, you said 2 months, you got it in like 1 week. Great, you know. And you get these big paychecks, you know, and then, boy, it's really encouraging.
How do you price for it?
All right, you got to make it to the end of the program. I'll tell you how to do that. How do you price for it? I mean, yeah, well, you know, I might change your mind on it, but you know, how do you price for it is an excellent question because there's so much that goes into it. So, for example, like, because I was working with a designer, he created like the logo. That's a whole skill in itself.
Yeah.
And that can be a multi-$1,000 gig in itself, by the way, right? What I do is I look at the complexity of the work. E-commerce costs more, content management costs more. Do they have their own photographs? Do they have their own words? Because if you have to shoot photographs and come up with the words too, that's an upcharge. How many hours are you putting into it? What do you want to be paid?
So as a front-end developer, you be your photographer as well.
Yeah.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. And see, I did a lot of work like that, Monica, where especially for my own business operations, you know, where I did big e-commerce sites that I like hand coded everything. I shot all the photographs, did all the copy, all the Photoshop work, everything, right? But the money was going in my pocket, right? It was for myself. If I'm doing that for others, I mean, shooting photographs, everybody's like, oh, I got a phone in my pocket, I can take a photo. But it doesn't mean it's a good photo, right? And even if it's a good photo, usually you have to drop it into like a graphics program, crop it, sharpen it, brighten it, tweak it, you know, and then label it correctly and then get it on the website correctly and place it. You know, that's all work, right? Websites are not inexpensive. You know, so if you go to an agency that does this, and I do hustle, side hustle with some agencies around here, they will pay you big money. I've had some agencies that just pay me to come in and fix little things and pay me thousands of dollars to do it. And if they hire me on an hourly rate, I'm usually charging it $150 to $200 an hour. Right? Yeah. So, not that you guys would start out at that point. Where I started out is I volunteered myself. Actually, my wife did. She got into like a nonprofit group, and she's like, "Oh, my husband can make the website." I'm like, "I can." I didn't even know how to do it, but I figured it out. They were happy with it. I had a portfolio piece, and then somebody else in that group is like, "Hey, I got this other group that I work with. We'll pay you." I'm like, "Yes." It wasn't a lot. But then it started rolling, and then one person talks to another, and I kept getting more work than I could handle. Right. Being mindful of the fact that I was running a business, teaching on the side, trying to raise a family, we have a house, all that stuff all at the same time. Right. But when you get a gig that where you can pick up some side money, and you guys could even potentially do it even at the beginning of your web stuff, if you can build a simple, decent looking website and people are willing to pay you for it, hey, go for it. Right? And you know, if it's just extra income, fantastic. You know, it's a win-win-win, right? All right, so kind of moving along here. We are going to finish off this PowerPoint, I hope, right? So here they show kind of an example of a really, really basic website with no images. This kind of looks like sort of where we're at, except we're starting to add images now. Header, nav, content, footer, right? Really basic, super basic wireframe. But I'm going to tell you what, as simple as that is, that works in a lot of scenarios. That layout right there, that might be the layout for your website. I don't know. I'm not sure I would necessarily do it like that. What they're saying is maybe a little better. Let's get some pictures on there. Let's put the content in there in columns because that's easier to read. We have some big pictures, some small pictures, some subheadings. Same basic header, nav, and footer though. Right. You can also kind of consider other approaches. Who says the nav has to be below the header? Who says the nav has to be on the top or the left? It could be on the right. There's no rules, right? How we build web pages often is based on convention of what other people do and think looks good. I'll just have you keep in mind, in the old days, we used to left justify everything and the nav was on the left, and now that's no longer the standard. It does change over time. So there's no rules as to what necessarily looks good. They talk about like, you know, and this is kind of the old approach right here is where we move everything to the left, right? Because we don't know how big people's screens were. And then somebody would come by with, oh, I got a giant monitor, and they'd get all this white space on the side. Then later on, we figured, hey, if we center it, it looks better. You know, there's also this concept of fluid layout. So, and that is where the website can actually fill the space that it has available and adjust based on the screen width automatically. This is kind of a thing, right? As we kind of look at various designs, by the way, I will often in the web browser start narrowing up the screen to see what it looks like on the phone or an iPhone or a tablet or something, intentionally to see, like, does it look good as I make it smaller? Sometimes you don't have to do anything to fix it. Sometimes you have to do a lot of work to fix it. They talk about what they call a flat website design. It's simple. The colors are not excessive, but it's still colorful. It's got very clear calls to action. and I think, basic, simple typography. There are kind of like a new school movement lately where people are building a lot of what we call single page websites, where the whole website's on one page. It's kind of a thing. And that actually works pretty well in some scenarios. I would be really careful with that though. And notice how we do talk about it more in chapter 6. So we'll circle back to that one. All right. If you do start using background attachments, right? And this is kind of a thing. So as you notice, this is a more of a conceptual chapter, chapter 5 is, and it's not a coding chapter. They may give you a couple little warnings here about like, if you're going to use backgrounds, how you place them and how you use them is important. Large images can be very impactful, but be careful with them also because it can kind of detract a little bit from design if you're not careful. So sometimes people will have like these big images on the page and it's like, why? Like, for example, we were experimenting with that food bank website the other night and we tried a theme and it had this beautiful like video header, like that was in motion. And I'm like, that's awesome. This is a food bank. How does it apply? It did not apply, right? This is so people can get something to eat because they're starving, seeing this beautiful video on top of a website doesn't necessarily help them. Mobile is a super huge consideration. I think we've talked about all these topics already, so I'm going to kind of skip over that. But like, it is not unusual. And when we first started doing mobile websites, we would actually run JavaScript that would probe the screen width and then give people a different web page, or sometimes even a completely different website, right? And some places still do that. Like they'll have a desktop website and a mobile website. Yeah, I'm going to say that you can do that, but it's generally avoided these days. The thing that is important though is that you do design your website to look good on mobile. So you could potentially, right, have one website that looks like this and one website that looks like that. The more modern approach though is to use responsive design, and you can follow these two things, but basically we do responsive design via media queries, and you can look at this website if you want to get some examples of that. But basically what that means is we take the content that looks good on the desktop, we apply some special CSS code to it, so when you change screen width, it automatically adjusts it so it looks good on mobile. That's a little bit of an art too. Here's another best practices thing, and you guys can look that up too. That's on the author's website. All right, that covers all the content here in chapter 5. So this video ends here.